I have read that when the sun sets over Kauai's Kekaha Beach on a clear night, if you look towards the horizon, one can see the island of Niihau, with its tall mountains and habitat for many endangered species, as well as about 130 or so Niihauans. For most of the state's residents, that's the only way to see the island of Niihau. The main Hawaiian islands all have nicknames. Hawaii is called the Big Island, Oahu is the Gathering Place, Maui is the Valley Isle, Kauai is the Garden Island, Niihau, about 18 miles northwest of Kauai, is the Forbidden Island. It has been privately owned by the same family since 1864, when Elizabeth Sinclair purchased it from King Kamehameha V for $10,000. Actually, Kamehameha IV agreed to sell the land, but died in 1863, and records show that his brother, Kamehameha V, completed the transaction on January 23, 1864. The great-grandson of Elizabeth Sinclair says, quote, "My great-grandmother purchased the island from the monarchy, and it's been virtually unchanged since that date by my family," says Bruce Robinson, who owns the island with his brother Keith. "We've tried to maintain the request of the king when it was turned over. We maintain the island for the people and continue to work it as he had." End of quote. King Kamehameha V also required that the family would promise to preserve the native Hawaiian language and Niihau's unique way of life. Quote, "Niihau is yours," Kamehameha IV said when he signed the contract, "but the day may come when Hawaiians are not as strong in Hawaii as they are now. And when that day comes, please do what you can to help them." Ownership of the island has stayed within the same bloodline ever since, and access to the 70-square-mile island has remained extremely restricted. Niihau actually became the Forbidden Island during a polio epidemic in the Hawaiian Islands in 1952, as Robinson explained. Quote, "My uncle wanted to protect the residents here from the epidemic, and it was forbidden to come out here unless you had a doctor's certificate, and there was a 2-week quarantine, and it worked. We never got polio out here." The name of the Forbidden Island stuck, and indeed the only people allowed on Niihau for generations were relatives of the Robinsons and the 130 or so native Niihauans living in the village of Pu'uwai. To this day, very few people ever get to visit the island. The island has no roads. There's dirt trails navigate its arid, bushy terrain. No cars, no stores, and no internet. Its sandy beaches see more wildlife than human footprints. Sleepy Hawaiian monk seals dot the coast, and schools of sharks have been known to swim remarkably close to empty shores. The Niihauans who remain on the island today live mostly as their native Hawaiian ancestors did, with hunting and fishing taking up the majority of their days. There are an estimated 70 permanent residents on the island, although that number fluctuates as Niihauans move away or return to the islands. They speak mainly native Hawaiian, but because of efforts by the island's only school and Niihauans' access to other islands, some residents also know English. They don't pay rent, they travel mostly by bike or on foot, and most homes rely on rain catchments and generators for water and electricity. They're also expected to abide by rules set by both the Robinsons and the village's earlier generations. Alcohol and guns are not allowed on the island, and anyone caught breaking the rules can be evicted. According to one former resident, on Sundays the entire village is expected to go to church and follow the Scottish Presbyterian Christianity of the original Robinson family and the missionaries that came to Niihau decades before it was purchased. MAKAHONU Huilani was born on the 12th of April, 1870 on the island of Niihau. Her parents were pure Hawaiian. Her father was Nalulu Olehua, and her mother was Kopeka. There were 7 children. The first, a male, Kanaheli. Second, Moha, female. Third, Kalima Hulu, male. Fourth, Pahahina, female. Fifth, Kaiwilulu, a male. And sixth was MAKAHONU, female. And seventh was Kalo Kuloa, male. She left Niihau when she was about 18 years of age and went to the island of Kauai. It was there that she met a young man who was employed as a cook. He was Chinese, and his name was Wang Ping, as she recorded in her genealogy record. But we have thought his last name was Wang and have written it as Ah Ping Wang, and the daughter, Mary, had Ah Ping Wang for her maiden name. So there is some confusion about which is his first and last name. On the 4th of July, 1890, when MAKAHONU was 20 years of age, she gave birth to a baby girl who was named Mary Kalaupapihiva Ah Ping Wang. She was living in Waimea on the island of Kauai, and she raised her daughter lovingly. We do not know what happened to Ah Ping Wang, but we conjecture that he either went back to China or possibly to Los Angeles. On June the 5th, 1904, MAKAHONU, at age 34, received the message of the gospel from the missionaries and was baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Her daughter Mary was also baptized, and Mary was soon to be 14 years of age. MAKAHONU spoke Hawaiian fluently, and she and her daughter translated pamphlets, hymns, and scriptures into Hawaiian to help spread the gospel message. MAKAHONU was a dear friend of Mary Kawina Pukui, who produced a Hawaiian language dictionary, and I was honored to visit with Mary Kawina Pukui in her home when I first came to Hawaii in 1962, and subsequently I would always call her about the meaning of each of our 3 daughters' Hawaiian names. We then know that MAKAHONU married William Kipe Naumu on Kauai. Kipe and MAKAHONU were devout members of the church. The Relief Society sisters would take care of the laundry of the missionaries and bring them food. And MAKAHONU did this service and always invited the missionaries into her home. Fred Lunt, who served a mission in Kauai, remembered MAKAHONU and her service to the missionaries. When MAKAHONU was 51 years old in 1921, her daughter Mary married Kifong Tiao in Honolulu, Oahu, Hawaii. In 1922, her first grandson Philip was born, and in 1923, her second grandson Elmer was born. MAKAHONU traveled to Oahu to help with each of the babies. In September of 1924, MAKAHONU traveled again to Oahu to help her daughter Mary as she was expecting their third baby in November. The baby born in November was Mary Ualani Tiao Locke, eventually Locke. One more baby would be born, and that was Clarence Laulani Tiao. William Kipe was in Kekaha working for the county, and Brother Fred Lunt was serving on a mission in Kauai in 22, 23, and 24, and he told me this story. Before the unions were organized, there was one union on Kauai. There was a strike by the Filipinos. It was the Filipinos versus the plantation. The Filipinos lived in the camps owned by the plantation, so when they struck, the plantation ousted them and they went to an abandoned Japanese temple in Hanapepe. On this day in September of 1924, a non-striking Filipino rode by on his bicycle, and the other striking Filipinos yelled out and called him a scab, and they ran out and captured him and held him hostage and were beating him. Word got back to the plantation, where they had already hired special officers to guard the plantation so the striking Filipinos couldn't return to their homes, and the plantation sent these reserve officers to help augment the regular police force to solve this escalating problem. The reserve officers were deputized, and Kipe was one of these men. About 25 police and reserve officers gathered on the road facing the Japanese temple. Inside the building, there was about 50 striking Filipinos. Brother Lunt and his companion heard the commotion and were standing on a ridge at Eli. The Filipinos came out of the building and started to walk towards the police. They were armed with machetes and had 1 or 2 guns. The police had rifles. The two groups were about 100 yards apart when a shot was fired from one of the sides, and in the ensuing action, 14 Filipinos and 4 special reserve officers were killed. The Filipinos started to scatter into the pasture on the left side and to find shelter in the cactus area, and some jumped into the Hanapepe River to escape. Kauai residents were shocked, and the whole island went into mourning for the 18 dead. Sheriff Crowell, the deputy sheriff, was wounded badly in the leg by a machete, and Ipolani, who was a sharpshooter, shot the Filipino as he attacked Crowell. Brother Lunt also remembers there was a Sheriff Rice who came from Lehui who was there. Well, sadly, Kipe Namu was shot in the stomach. 2 others from Waimea and Moses Kua, who was shot in the head, were all members of the church, so they had a joint funeral at Kekaha. Brother Lunt helped to dress Kipe in his temple clothes. He remembers that MAKAHONU and Mary came on the boat, and there was lots of wailing and mourning all over the island, and people said that MAKAHONU and Mary wailed all the way from the boat to their home. And Brother Lunt and his companion had been staying at Moses Kua's home, so they were especially shocked with his death. And Moses had a son, Hosea, who was 18, and the Relief Society talked and decided that the son should go to Kamehameha school. So they had Brother Lunt write a letter to Mr. Frank Midcalf and ask him, even though school had already started, could they make an exception and let this young man come to the school here on Oahu? And Midcalf understood the situation, and he said, quote, "Yes, of course. Get the boy ready and send him to Kamehameha." So the Relief Society got clothes and a mosquito net ready for him to come to Oahu on the boat. But on the day the boat came, young Hosea hid in the mountains till the boat left because he didn't want to leave Kauai. So they realized that if he really didn't want to go to Kamehameha, that they couldn't force him to do so, and they rode to the school to thank them anyway, and the plantation put him on as an apprentice in blacksmithing. He eventually married, raised a family, and at the time of my interview with Brother Fred Lunt, he told me that one of Hosea's daughters works in the temple in Laie and married Victoria Holt's daughter's son. Well, Brother Lunt said he would see her from time to time. Plantation decided to give all the families $500 as compensation. Young Hosea was too young to receive his, so Brother Fred Lunt was appointed to be a trustee for him. Well, you can imagine Makahonu was broken-hearted. She was persuaded by her daughter to come to Honolulu and live there. So she moved to Oahu and lived on Weaver Lane, which is behind the present Board of Water Supply building on Beretania Street. She lived there with two boys that she adopted, Robert and Tavy, and both boys eventually moved to San Francisco, as I understand it. Elmer remembers sleeping at his Tutu's place, and she took care of him while his mother was teaching school. He could remember how his Tutu would sometimes give him money to go to a movie and would buy him clothes. And Elmer remembers that she took him on a summer trip to Kauai, and they stayed with Uncle Kauhi and Auntie Lei Ho'okano and all his cousins. He loved that family, and Auntie Lei was a close friend of Elmer's mother. In 1925 and 1926, Brother Clinton Lunt, brother to Fred, started a branch of the church in Kaka'ako. They met in a room at Pohokaina School. They had to bring their own chairs. When Brother Fred Lunt returned to Oahu, he was eventually asked to take over the branch and was called a branch president. He remembers that Makahonu Hona, which is what he called her, Makahonu Hono, would bring the children and daughter Mary, and they would attend the branch. And Makahonu would go to the Hawaiian class. Brother Lunt said she was very humble and spiritual, and all people respected her and admired her for herself, as well as because she was the mother of Mary, who was such a great leader. Makahonu had a good knowledge of the gospel from his observation. And Makahonu and her Relief Society companion, Jenny Wood, would go to visit the sisters of the church, and after their visit was over, these two sisters would catch the trolley bus to Kaimana Beach Hotel to have lunch. Tutu and Jenny were always regally dressed in their holokus and hats. When Makahonu was 64 years old in 1934, Ki Fong and Mary moved into a home on the corner of Punch Bowl Street and Vineyard Street. Makahonu was invited to move in with them. In 1937, when she was 67 years of age, she took Elmer on a trip to Kona. He was 13 at the time and remembers staying with her friends and going fishing, and how the uncles and Tutu gave him a full Hawaiian name that summer, Lia Ka'alawai Nui, which meant the great fisherman. He had fun exploring on the Kona coast, and the father of the family where they stayed had built a tiny Catholic church on the coast, which is still standing today, and his name was Kikahuna. When I learned that there is a place called MAKAHONU, and it is the residence of Kamehameha I and was located at the north end of Kailua Bay in Kailua Kona on Hawaiian Island, I wondered if she was named after Kamehameha I's residence or after the Eye of the Turtle. Kamehameha I, also known as Kamehameha the Great, who unified the Hawaiian Islands, lived out the last years of his life and instituted some of the most constructive measures of his reign there at MAKAHONU. The residential compound includes the personal shrine, Ahu'ina Heiau, of the king. The name means Temple of the Burning Altar in the Hawaiian language. And there is a beach near Kailua Kona called MAKAHONU Beach, and the word means the turtle eye in the Hawaiian language. There's also a MAKAHONU Point, and Elmer also told me that his Tutu took him into the burial tunnels where few people have ever gone. Well, this was a summer trip, and Elmer had just finished the 9th grade. He was attending St. Louis School. The year was 1937. 4 years later, on August 12, 1941, MAKAHONU had a severe asthma attack. Asthma had been a growing health problem with her. Her grandson Elmer tried to hold her up to make breathing easier, but as he held her in his arms, she passed away. She was 71 years of age. Elmer was 17 years of age at the time. The funeral was held at Borthwick Mortuary, and MAKAHONU was buried in the Diamond Head Cemetery. About 3 months later, on December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor was bombed, and MAKAHONU's brother, Kanahele's son, on Niihau, became a national hero for his bravery. And 8 years later, on March 31st, 1949, her daughter, Mary Kalaupapahiva Apingwang Tiao, would be buried next to her after suffering a cerebral aneurysm. Because of MAKAHONU and her Hawaiian heritage, at least 17 of her posterity were able to attend Kamehameha School. 2 carried her name of Uilani, which means beautiful heaven, and 5 daughters in each of her 4 children's families was given the special name of Kalaupapahiva, meaning extremely precious one, as MAKAHONU had named her daughter Mary. MAKAHONU left a legacy of love implanted in the heart of all who knew her. She was full of aloha and was beloved by many, but especially in her grandson Elmer's heart. Elmer says his Tutu taught him what love was all about. She was his beloved Tutu. He cherished her all the days of his life and passed that love down to his children. MAKAHONU Naumu was a hero of her life on earth.